To the extent that we live our lives in a manner that is consistent with the truth in our heart, we thrive.
Welcome to the Meyer Clinics podcast, and you just heard a quote from one of your hosts, Dr. Lisa Day. Join our licensed clinical professionals from various backgrounds as they discuss fascinating mental health topics with a wide range of guests. Meyer Clinics is a Christian counseling organization with multiple clinics nationwide dedicated to treating the whole person, emotionally, physically, and spiritually. Welcome to our listening family. We thank you for joining us. Hey everyone, we're back with Kristen Sonant-Walker, me, and Dr. Lisa Day. Hello, Lisa.
Hello, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Yes, we're going to follow up our show that we just played for you all last week about anxiety and anxiety in our teenagers with the medication piece, the good, the bad, and the not so great. And Lisa, you just rattled off a term before we started, and I thought, oh, that's interesting, and that term is out there. So please tell our listeners what that is.
Oh yeah, so we're looking at the epidemic really of Xanax, of opiates, of fentanyl, and I was reading something the other day, and I just thought it was profound, and it's being referred to as the serial killer on our streets, and that comes from an article in Seattle where since July, 3 adolescent boys, I believe the youngest was 14, I do know the others were 16 and 17, who unfortunately, whether it was in a party atmosphere, though the article I read, the young man was not in a party scene at all, found themselves in their hands Oxycontin, so an opiate. And in the case of the last article I read, this young man was simply taking it because he did have a long history of anxiety, which is why we're going to talk about that here today. And it was late at night, 2:15, I think was his last text to his girlfriend that he couldn't sleep. And then he went on to take something that one of his friends gave him in the event that he couldn't sleep, only to not wake up. And unfortunately, this young man was a victim of what I think is now 700 incidences in Seattle alone of Oxycontin and or fentanyl that is attained off the black market and is laced with fentanyl. And for those of our listeners who don't know what Xanax is a benzodiazepine, a very effective benzodiazepine that is prescribed for anxiety. And it works, on our neurochemical system, and it helps bring relief, from the destructive, and the uncomfortable symptoms of anxiety. However, the concern, that what we're seeing now is the misusing and abusing of Xanax. But that doubled, and we'll talk a little bit about this later, with now the risk of this being attained on the streets and not knowing who the manufacturer is. And so, for most people who struggle with anxiety, Xanax or Ativan, Klonopin, or Valium, those are very common benzodiazepines that are prescribed, appropriately described, if you will, for anxiety. Right. But unfortunately, people have found this in high school and in colleges and actually into adulthood, and they're using it recreationally. And in fact, one study I read said that up to 10% of our youth, 10%, well, of actually older youth, so 10% of folks between 18 and 25 are abusing Xanax, and that's double the amount of adults, so those over 25.
I know, and we're seeing it where, and it, look, kids and teens using substances, this is nothing new. We're not reporting anything new. It's the levels at which it's going on that's epidemic. And what I hear, and these are from good, in my family sources, are, okay, so they're using Xanax to come down, and they're abusing things like Vyvanse and Adderall to get back up again.
Right. Or both in the same evening, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, and then throw a little alcohol in there, and you've got a fatal, a potential for a fatal overdose. I call that, I think you've heard me say this before, I call that the Jim Jones syndrome, in that, one thing we do know about him back in the day is that he would take uppers in the morning and downers at night. And so, we're seeing, one of the primary drugs of abuse here in our valley is the Adderall, And where we're seeing the deadly, truly deadly outcomes is then with the counter Xanax and alcohol at night. So they're just Russian roulette, playing with fire. It's insane. I mean, I think that there was, about 23,000 deaths from benzodiazepine overdoses last year. And about 700 of them were teens, under the age of 18.
I know. And we talked about this a little bit on the last show, and it bears repeating. It's something to go to some kind of therapeutic treatment, like, as an example, EMDR, and work on trauma that you've experienced. But it's a whole other level of unpacking and unwinding that we don't even know how to do or what to do when you experience trauma under the influence of psychiatric medication.
Oh, meaning
and mixed with alcohol,
mixed with alcohol. Yeah. And you black out. Yeah.
And, so then you're raped, or you are bullied, or you are attacked in some way. And I had someone call me that was driving Uber at night, and they were sexually assaulted. And this is a young woman, and she's sexually assaulted. And, she goes home, and she was calling me just to have somebody to talk to, because she was driving someone that was intoxicated in her vehicle, calls me. This is not a teenager, but a early 20s young woman. And she gets home, and then she just calls her family, and she decides, she can't sleep. So she takes some Xanax and she drinks some alcohol, and then she goes out, drives, and ends up getting sexually assaulted again, and in a car accident. And now she has a DUI. So unpacking the first assault, and then she doesn't really totally remember what happened with the second one. I can't even fathom, the way that our brain works and is wired, and how trauma rests in your body. How do you unpack something that happened when you're not really altogether there?
And how is it that we're finding ourselves in those situations, right? So I say it's the reckless use, but really, the more appropriate statement is that there's a bona fide lack of judgment, meaning, people are not thinking through the ramifications of what they're taking. So, most reports show that with teens and adults, their first use of Xanax, if you will, is from their parents' medicine cabinet. And, and not only, did they maybe take it or steal it, but there's one study that shows, that kids between the ages of 13 and 18, who will present to their moms most often, and being uncomfortable, anxious, and moms innocently, quote unquote, give them their Xanax, right? And so that's their first introduction. But even though moms have their child's well-being in mind, they're not MDs, and they're not trained in being able to look at what is the appropriate medication to help the struggle that the kid is experiencing. But unfortunately, that kid then experiences the euphoria or the high associated with that. And when can no longer get it from parents' medicine cabinet, is getting it on the street. So this young woman that you talk about, the thing that is alarming is, I'm a psychiatric nurse, and an average dose, prescribed for anxiety, and Xanax is a good medication for anxiety, folks. Don't get me wrong. It's a good medication, but the typical dose prescription is about 0.25 to 0.5. So a quarter to a half of a milligram. And some people need higher doses, but the typical is 0.25 to 0.5. Well, what we're finding on the streets, with these Z bars, these Xans, the blue footballs, if you will, is that the black market is made by people who have no concept of dosage or what's going in there. And the average bar, if you will, not the cocktail bar, but the Xan bar that you're finding on the street is anywhere between 4 to 16 times stronger than the adult prescribed dose. So, whether this young woman you knew had a prescription for it and took it appropriately, Lord knows when you mix it with alcohol, it can be a fatal outcome, and absolutely is going to impair your driving. But the stuff that the kids and the young adults are getting from their friends or from dealers on the street is so much higher. And so when I say that lack of judgment, I don't know if this comes from a sense of immediate gratification, if this comes from a sense of peer pressure, wanting to fit in, wanting to decrease social anxiety at a party. But someone says, here, I got some Xans, you want one? And they may take one, they may take two, they may take 4, only to find what looks to be an arresting state when they're actually dead. So it's a Russian roulette. It's the serial killer on the street, and it's at an epidemic level. and terrifying, just terrifying.
Yep. And we talked about why we'll keep beating the drum of, social media plays an impact. And we're not saying, social media can be used for good. It's our use of it that's not good. And then there are some other things brought into it as well. But it's not just that. It's the smartphone. It's really the constantly being plugged in to technology. It's that piece and then everything that comes with that is right on the same timeline as this jump in suicide, depression. I mean, we will not, even though it's wonderful that mental health is now quote unquote mainstream. So Lisa and I will never be out of a job. But on the other side of that, we need it to be mainstream because the rate at which people are going to therapy, that they're abusing substances and also, prescribed medication or medication that hasn't been prescribed to them. The amount that it's gone up since just even the smartphone being put in our hand in, I think, 2007 is unreal.
Oh, epidemic. And it's not uncommon to feel insecurity or anxiety or these pressures to conform during our teen years, during our young adulthood, and then even further. But, the other thing, in addition to that social media component, is that, Xanax use, unfortunately, whether we like it or not, particularly to the teenage population, it's glorified and it's popularized in their music, their social media, the movies, the TV, the teen pop culture, if you will, glorify it. It's shown in party scenes. And so it looks appealing. There's a study that shows that kids as young as 8 years old can recognize the word Xanax just from some of the music they listen to. So, definitely there's the anxiety-driven component. Definitely there's the glorified party component. And then there's those who fall into it because they do have a need for their central nervous system to be brought down. Right. But once they begin to take it on a regular basis, what the kiddos and young adults don't realize is it's incredibly addictive. And it's incredibly addictive at a very accelerated rate. So, if you take it, for a couple of weeks, your body and your brain chemistry is already beginning to change. And so your natural state, unmedicated, or when the medication is moving out of your system, moves into a higher level of distress or a higher level of anxiety. And it's really the frog in boiling water. You start to see.
Let me tell you, listeners, how awful it is to come off of Xanax. I've taken it and it's been wonderful. It has helped me, and I've never abused it. I've taken it during, like after my father passed away, just appropriate with a prescription, not overdosing with it or abusing it in any way. And coming off of it, the level of anxiety that you have, the lack of the insomnia that you have, it's awful. It's awful. It's enough to where I would really have to be in a crisis to ever go near it again.
And it's not isolated to 3 to 4 days. I mean, so one of the challenges actually when we do identify, teen addiction, young adult addiction, Xanax addiction, one of the challenges into getting folks into therapy is that you will absolutely grow violently ill. It takes getting violently ill to get sober. And so it's so important that people not try to do it on their own. If parents saying, well, I'm just going to keep them at home, I'm not going to let them out of the house. And lo and behold, they go into full, blown detox illness. And it's not a fun scene. It's not a fun scene at all. The other thing that's involved with that, though, is, once addiction does set in, there's a terror of what sobriety might feel like. They've grown so familiar with the calming and sedating effects of the Xanax that the fear of being sober keeps them from getting help. They're not willing to do it. It's terrible.
That, and we talked about this on the last show too, how you are teens because of that instant gratification that you get from the likes and from searching information quickly online, and they're being trained not to have patience, and they already don't have patience, and we are too. We're being trained for that too. It's not just teenagers, but that piece goes so against what therapy does for you. Therapy is about time. It's about patience. It's about committing to going and sticking with it, working through feeling uncomfortable. And we are flooded with all kinds of things that we carry in our hand. I was just on a news program the other day, and they were asking some political questions that I will not get into, but they wanted to know, well, are we weaponized to deal with things like social media? And I said, are we weaponized? Hello, this is our weapon. And I held up my cell phone. We're carrying the weapon in our hand every day. It's the thing that we freak out and have a panic attack if we walk from the kitchen to the dining room and we'd forgotten left it in the kitchen. That's the weapon. So it's not a question of if we are, it's already here. Now, what are we going to do about it?
Hi, this is Dr. Paul Meyer of the Meyer Clinics. Our Christian counselors across the country have a goal of helping all those who come to us to become what God has called them to be. If you're in a situation where you're not at peace within yourself, or you just feel like there's joy that's missing in your life, we can come alongside to help you obtain peace and joy.
This message is sponsored by the Meyer Clinic Foundation, a nonprofit Christian counseling ministry. The number is 1-888-7-CLINIC, 1-888-7-CLINIC.
And what are we going to do about the fallout? And knowing that,
exactly,
anxiety is definitely, anxiety has definitely been shown through multiple studies to have increased through the development of cell phones and then therefore social media. So then with the anxiety, you lead to the Xanax use and abuse. And it's a quiet abuse, so families and parents, partners will often say, well, I think they've taken it. They've told me they've taken it. How do I know? What does it look like? What does abuse look like? What are the patterns that I'm going to see? And, so you have anxiety, but then you're going to have the subsequent depression. When it's out of the system, they just fall, the dopamine falls. But you can see irritability and confusion, definitely memory impairment, interference in school functioning and interference in job functioning. One who is addicted to Xanax, I always say they look like they're get up and go, got up and went. They're drowsy, they're low energy, they look checked out. So they don't look high like if they've been smoking pot, with the red eyes and really kind of checked out. It's more, it's a drugged look. And, we move so fast in our society that we don't always stop to notice that. Or we think, oh, that's just a teen, or, oh, that's just the dopey mopey, college student who doesn't want to do homework. But, it continues, and you see impaired coordination. You see strange accidents, tripping over curbs, right? They come in with broken noses because they tripped over their own feet. Mm. And, you see that more, the clumsiness, the shaking. And there are so many people who will speak to this, but, one thing we know is that teen pregnancies are actually lower now than they were years ago. And certainly part of that is education and birth control, but also with substance use, abuse, and dependence, there's decreased libido. There's decreased interest. Yeah.
Yes, that's right.
And reaching out. Yeah. And so, knowing what it looks like and not minimizing it, because typically speaking, if you go up and ask someone, are you abusing something? They're not going to say, oh, pick me. Yes, I am. And I'd like some help.
I know. And, the only generation that's having a lot of sex really is the senior citizen population, because that is the only generation that has a significant rise in STDs.
Oh, is that right?
That is a fact, my friend.
Well, so they're not abusing
They're not
Xanax,
on social
clearly.
media. Yeah, they're not on social media as much as our youth are, and they're like, well, I'm 80, so what does it matter? I'm just going to have fun. And so, yeah, I've done shows just on that, and they are not distracted with a device. They're playing around with each other in the nursing homes.
Thank goodness.
But they're not following, good protection protocols. But, it's fascinating how we're seeing less of the rampant sex and pregnancy and things like that in the teen years, and it's ratcheted up. Or maybe it's just always been that way, and now it's so low in the end that it makes the other stand out. Who knows?
And less dating. Research is showing that kids are dating less. They're getting together less. They're having less sex.
Takes too long.
Yeah. And so, it's that vicious cycle. Is it the chicken or the egg? What's causing what? And, I just do know that one of the fallouts is anxiety. And because kids are not utilizing therapeutic services and they're looking to self-medicate, and they're finding self-medication, it's not hard to find Xanax. My older daughter goes to school at SMU, and there was recently an article of 10 people, and SMU is in Highland Park, which is one of the nicer areas of Dallas. And in Highland Park, there was a raid, there was a bust of 10 people who were manufacturing, thank you very much, a pill press system, if you will, and distributing Xanax. Unfortunately, this Xanax was laced with fentanyl. And the kids were ending up in, week-long life-threatening seizure activity. And so it's, what our kids are stumbling into to medicate that anxiety that is secondary to all of the, factors that we talked about, in addition to the impact of social media. It's disabling them. And so being able to, one of the things that I want and one of the things that I teach is, really looking at one, it's not happening on the news, right? It's happening next door. It's happening in our homes. And I readily encourage parents of teens to ask your children, have you taken Xanax? Do you take Xanax? Are pills, in your school? And not that the question needs to be answered so that kid could be punished by any means, but beginning to open up the lines of communication. Meaning last week, I texted my older daughter and I said, this doesn't need a response, but I just want you to tell every single person in every path that you cross to not take pills. The pills on the street are not what you think they are. Right. And, this population who's gotten used to taking some OxyContin, some Percocet, Xanax, and then they can't get it by prescription, they resort to getting it on the streets. And I said, it is a serial killer. And I said, no questions asked, my love, but please start spreading that word. Because it is out there. And the other thing is that, with parents, I say we want to open the lines of communication. We want to open lines of communication of anxiety, of pressure to drink, pressure to use drugs, the pills that are available, and not take it with a judgmental attitude, but more with an educational attitude. So I know that I have 2 adult children who live in my home right now. And I always, whenever I read anything, I learned something new the other day about cannabis and about THC, and that the edibles, if you will, the pot chewy cookies, candies, and what have you that you can buy in California or Washington or all those legal states. One thing I didn't know is that the retailers, part of being able to increase the potency of those is by the removal of the CBD component of the cannabis plant. And it's actually the CBD component of the cannabis plant that protects the neurochemical structure of the brain. So I never knew that. And I don't go and say, so don't do this, guys. I say, hey, listen, I just want to share a fact with you, which is really quite alarming, is that one of the side effects, or one of the reasons that these things are so strong, is that they're removing the built-in protection. Not that I'm taking a position of whether pot is right or wrong, but what is readily available in many states in our countries right now is a substance that has purposefully removed the brain protecting qualities. So, being able to have these kinds of conversations openly with our kids rather than from a position of fear, because, core to human behavior is, to the extent that we are afraid, we control. I'm not going to let my kid out of the house. I'm not going to let any friends come over. You're not going to have a life. And that's not going to cut it. We want to keep lines of communication open, and we want to be able to educate our kids about not only the dangers and the epidemic of anxiety, but the dangers of the pills that they're getting on the streets. And really to come to realization that it's not happening to those drug addicts, right?
Right.
I think in our society, and you and I are big advocates for mental illness, and we're big advocates for recovery and for those struggling with addictions. But there's still huge stigma to that kid or those kids. They're the potheads, they're the drug users.
Right.
And yet it's not isolated to that population.
No.
It has found, Xanax has found itself into the homes of those kids who don't know how to ask for help for their anxiety, for their sleep difficulties.
And I've said this on other shows, maybe not on this particular podcast, but we have a big first responder network with Mental Health News Radio Network, and first responders, so firemen, policemen, nurses, EMTs, ambulance people that work on an ambulance. I'm missing somebody, I'm sure, but veterans. I mean, these are first responders. And in, let's say, a city like San Diego, California, which is a hugely populated city, we had a bunch of first responders on that said, listen, I'm a fireman, and it used to be that when we would get a call in a certain zip code or a certain area code, we'd go, okay, you need to suit up, wear the Kevlar vest, because it's that area. And ever since what we're talking about has come to pass and is now in epidemic levels, There are no more that areas. Every single phone call from anywhere is you better suit up, you better bring a kit in case someone's OD'd, you better every single call. And that is every single day.
Well, and I read a figure yesterday that said this blew me away. I read a figure yesterday that more people will die from opiate overdoses this year than died in all of Vietnam.
Yes.
More people will die this year, meaning it's not getting better, it's getting worse. And then the problem, and I won't go into this because this is a pretty provocative political debate, but we have opiates that were introduced into our culture in the 90s, and now we have a different set of opiates to treat those opiate addictions that we're seeing in the 2019. So we're not getting away from the opiate addiction, we're just choosing a legal opiate to address the illegal opiate use in our culture. And so it's terrifying. It's absolutely terrifying. And when I speak about the fentanyl, I mean, fentanyl, is a synthetic opiate, but to put it in perspective, Kristen, and most people don't know this, but fentanyl is 50 times more powerful than heroin. 50 times.
50 times, yep.
It's 100 times more powerful than morphine. And what's even scarier is if you take, I don't know what kind of salt you use, but if you take your salt and just give it one teeny shake, not even enough that you would, wipe up with your sponge, that's all it takes to kill you.
I know, just touching it, I said, we have so many first responders, they have to wear gloves, and sometimes they double glove themselves when they're reaching into pockets and bags of whatever to see what something is, because just even touching it and getting it on your fingers and then getting that somewhere else somehow makes it to your mouth or wherever, that's enough to kill someone.
And this is what our illegal suppliers of Xanax and Oxycontin, or the opiates, are using to put into the pills that they're selling on the streets. Yeah. Not chemists, not scientists, they're suppliers, they're pill pressers. They're making them at home.
And what's interesting too, I mean, we've got, that's a great thing about having Mental Health News Radio. Sometimes it's difficult because we have, we're everybody in mental health and, addiction recovery has a story, and sometimes it can be scary. We have someone on the network who was in prison for a while, and he does a great show about prisons and mental health. And we have people that have been in severe addiction, and, that's their journey. We're a different kind of organization. We have to do different kinds of background checks. Right? It's a lot of our people, not a lot, but, some of our people that are on the network probably wouldn't do well in a background check, but that's not how we, look at background. But what's interesting is even going to them, and these are people that are, now in their late 50s, and they were hardcore addicts, hardcore. We're talking heroin, we're talking, hardcore. They have said, I wouldn't survive with what's out there today. I'd be dead.
Oh, I'd be dead. And that's why it's killing our 16-year-olds, why they can't sleep at night and they just need something to go to sleep. Yeah.
When I heard one of them say that, Johnny Calloway, which he would have no problem with me saying that, he does morph into a new you, and he's lovely. And we're talking hardcore, mm-hmm. long time, 30-year, addiction that devotes his life now to helping other people. I mean, for him to say, I wouldn't have made it, that you have those moments that come up that really sort of shock you awake. And I hear stuff all day. So do you, Lisa. Mm-hmm. That shocked me awake in a way,
Well, and it's real, Kristen. I mean, since the summer, so since July, I personally know 4 individuals under the age of 25 who are now dead because of some association with a fentanyl laced Xanax or oxycodone. I was speaking with a provider who's worked long time in the drug addiction and recovery world. And he said, 10 years ago, it used to be, or maybe 15 years ago, it used to be, you come in on Monday and you follow up with the folks who you left on Friday and you continue treatment as always. And he said that easily he could say that when he comes back on Monday, 4 of those 10 people are dead. 4 of those 10 people are dead. on an outpatient setting.
Yeah, that's why that is why I look at some of I look at Joe Mitch as an example, and Stephen Kavalkovich. These are podcasters as well with their own shows, and they work in treatment centers, and the stuff that they see every day, I'm like, you guys are going to burn out. And the sad thing is that's what is happening in treatment centers. Because they're on the front lines with people coming in and knowing that maybe insurance isn't going to help, or they can just tell because they've been through it themselves that this person is not ready for treatment. But to see that every day, there is no, oh, there's that war that's going on over there in that other country. Like, the war is not only on our shores, it's throughout our entire country. The war is here.
It is here, and it knows no socioeconomic status. It has no demographic, prejudice.
Doesn't care what your race, your religion, your sex, nothing.
No, and literally, I say, they are dropping like flies, and literally, it feels as though we are in a war zone. And it just a couple of weeks ago, I just was irate. I got yet another information from a child back in Seattle who had gone, and I just thought, this is insane. It's out of control. I'm a therapist. I've been a therapist for 30 years, and it terrifies me because we're not hitting it. We're not getting it. And so, I think, what do? We have podcasts like this, and we talk about it, and we say, what can parents, family, and friends do? You need to have insight. You need to have knowledge. You need to have open lines of communication. And you need to know the signs and symptoms, and you need to not take any situation lightly. I think we want to minimize because we don't want to think that our kids have a problem. But not only we don't want to take it lightly, but we also don't want to come in with a punishment. We want to come in from a platform of, I'm here to help you because we are in a war zone. And unfortunately, you are the victim. And I am going to hold space and come along with you and ride here and help you find the proper level of treatment so that we can keep you alive. And the other thing, Kristen, I'm jumping out of my seat, we think overdose. And we put them in that stigma category of, oh, those irresponsible kids, adults, losers, they overdose. These aren't suicides.
No,
these aren't suicides. We'll have a different discussion about opiates and suicide because it's a sure way, right? Gun is one way, but opiates are another. But these are accidental overdoses. These are people who did not intend to die because they didn't know what they were playing with. They didn't know. They didn't think through the lack of judgment of, what am I doing and what are the potential consequences of this.
Exactly.
I unanimously, any opportunity that I have as a provider, and I teach everybody I know to try to communicate this same message, is that do not obtain any drugs illegally. Do not obtain any drugs illegally. And this is a no questions asked. I don't go into, are you abusing, do you need psychological help? It's the message on the street. Any opportunity I have, do not obtain any drugs illegally, because these people, they do not have your best interest in mind. They have their pocket in mind. There's no way to know what is in the pill that you are taking if you're getting it illegally. Suppliers of drugs, they don't give a hoot about what happens on the other side.
No, and sometimes the suppliers, which can be other, we've done shows on how recruitment of, even other teenagers and even younger, a lot of them don't even know themselves what they're handing out.
Absolutely. Well, absolutely. I mean, we talk about the number, back in my day, the number one drugs that were sold in the high school were Black Beauties, speed, and Colombian gold, right? Pot. And, this is a little bit off the Xanax topic, but pot is not what pot was back in the day. And yet kids, again, they have no experience with anything but. And it's so, it's ignorance is the power of the strength of it growing, because there's just an ignorance that it's not damaging to the brain. And all research is showing us that pot is damaging to the neurodevelopment of the brain. And, and Black Beauties back in the day, they were illegal speed. Well, it doesn't even need to be illegal now. Kids are getting Adderall prescriptions right and left and selling them for $17, $18 a pill at school. And so if I'm going to sell you that pill, why wouldn't I trade you for one of those white pills that then can help me go to sleep at night? There's just lack of thought, lack of follow through. And I speak passionately, and I don't mean to come across judgmentally. I'm more panicked because it's become a commonplace within our youth. It's not those kids, those bad kids, those drug addicts, those potheads. It's our culture. And so it is an epidemic. It is taking our kids, our family, our friends left and right. I would be hard pressed to find one person I know who doesn't know someone who they've lost to an accidental drug-related situation. And at this point in time, with the accessibility, it's killing our kids. It's taking them.
Absolutely. So what can we give listeners as some to-dos and maybe some hope?
Oh, absolutely. Read. Read. There are a bazillion articles on Xanax abuse in adolescents, the Oxycontin crisis, the opiate crisis. I find people don't want to read the opiate crisis because they think it's those people, right? I say, read about the opiate crisis, read about the Xanax crisis, educate yourself. Open lines of communication with your friends, with your families, with your, we're so used to, someone's having a hard time, we stay away. Lean into them. Things don't seem right. You don't seem well. We talk about this with our suicidal podcasts, but lean in. Are things okay? Are you hurting? Can I be here for you? So educate yourself. Don't take it lightly. Lean in. Realize that accidental death from the use of these is huge. Educate. Do not buy, do not use any drugs obtained illegally. For parents, monitor the medications in your home. The old concept of the medicine cabinet, I think, has changed. I can visualize one when I was a kid, but now we just have bathrooms, right? And they have drawers. And many families just throw their medications in a drawer thinking they're fine, not thinking for a minute that their kid would come in and take it. Well, it's not only your kid, but your kid's friends who come visit will go scouring through drawers because it's normalized. So keep medications locked up and dispose of medications that you don't need.
Right.
There's definitely, hospitals and different sites where you can police stations, hospitals usually will be good sites to dispose of medication. But the biggest, I think, is education and open communication, and try to the best of your ability to abandon that shame, that guilt, that labeling. Come from a position of, I'm here, to hold you arm in arm, educate you, equip you for the real dangers and the real threats that are luring out there on our streets, in our schools, in our homes.
Absolutely. We'll do a show on what to say and not to say to someone who is having some kind of an issue.
But it makes or breaks.
It does.
I was speaking with a friend of mine who's long time in the recovery program. And I was having a conversation with him about how I addressed this with one young man in my office. And, he said, Lisa, you may have just saved a life. You may have just saved a life. And we don't realize that our words have so much to do with regard to the safety to address the problem. If we as parents are afraid of it and seek to control it, we're doomed. But if we're afraid of it and educate ourselves, educate our children, keep communication open, and be that safe ear, meaning to, for your kids to be able to say, Mom, I'm concerned about Susie. She's just not been herself. And then how we can begin to open those communications with Susie's family, in a manner that's not punishing, degrading, or shaming, but is concerned, sincere, and wanting to provide help.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. All right, Dr. Lisa Day, thank you for covering this topic today.
Oh, Kristen, thank you so much for being willing to cover these topics on both teen addiction and teen anxiety, the new AA, right? Yeah. Anxiety and addiction, they go hand in hand.
Absolutely.
Oh, and the one last thing I would say on that of what can we do is put your cell phones down.
Yes.
Have eye contact with your kids. Talk less. Listen more.
And your animals.
Yeah, talk less, listen more, be there, have eye contact, be involved.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you, Kristen.
Thank you, listeners, for tuning in to another episode of the Meyer Clinics podcast. We hope you enjoyed this podcast. Tune in next time for another engaging discussion on relevant mental health topics. If you have any questions about Meyer Clinics, please visit our website at meyerclinics.com. That's MEIER clinics.com, or call us at 888-7-CLINIC. Don't forget to leave us a review on iTunes, Stitcher, or any of your favorite podcast apps. And please note that we are a member of and produced by Mental Health News Radio Network, MHNRnetwork.com.